There is a certain quiet satisfaction that comes with a life well lived. For 40 years, I navigated the sharp-elbowed, high-stakes world of corporate marketing. I was good at it, very good. My name, Eleanor Hayes, once carried weight in boardrooms across the country. I built campaigns, launched brands, and mentored a generation of bright young minds. Then, 5 years ago, I did something no one in my industry ever thought I would do. I walked away. I retired. Not because I had lost my edge, but because I had won the game, and I decided I no longer wished to play. My life now is a much quieter affair. It is a life of well-tended gardens, of long walks with my dog, of leisurely lunches with old friends. I traded my power suits for comfortable cashmere, my boardrooms for my sun-drenched living room. I am not wealthy in the way my son's generation understands the term, with flashy cars and cavernous minimalist houses. My wealth is in my experience, my memories, and the quiet, unshakable confidence that comes from having absolutely nothing left to prove. If you are listening, and you know the difference between a life that looks successful and a life that feels successful, please subscribe and let me know. This is a story about a night when those two worlds collided in the most spectacular and public way imaginable. My son, Mark, is a good man. He has my late husband's kind heart and a gentle, steady nature. He is a successful architect, a loving father, and a devoted husband to his wife, Jessica. And it is Jessica who is the central character in this story. My daughter-in-law is a woman of immense ambition. She is beautiful, driven, and possesses a relentless, almost terrifying desire to climb the social and corporate ladder. She sees the world as a series of rooms, and her life's mission is to get into the most exclusive, most powerful room of all. For the past year, she has been a mid-level marketing manager at Peterson & Co., one of the most prestigious and notoriously difficult firms in the city. To her, it was the job of a lifetime, a stepping stone to the life of influence she so desperately craved. And for the past year, I have had to listen to her endless anxieties and pronouncements about it. The new CEO, James Peterson, is a legend, Eleanor, she told me one Sunday afternoon, her voice a mixture of awe and terror. They say he's ruthless. He can make or break a career in a single meeting. I have to find a way to get on his radar. I just smiled and nodded, offering some vague, grandmotherly encouragement. I did not tell her that 25 years ago, a young, brilliant, and terrified intern named Jamie Peterson used to bring me coffee every morning, his hands shaking as he presented his first marketing proposals to me. I did not tell her that I was the one who saw the spark of genius in him, who mentored him, who championed him, and who gave him the first major campaign that launched his legendary career. These were stories from a past life, a life I had left behind. They were irrelevant now. Or so I thought. The invitation arrived on a Tuesday. I was at Mark and Jessica's house for dinner. Jessica burst through the door, waving a thick, cream-colored envelope in her hand, her face flushed with a look of pure, unadulterated triumph. "I got it! I got it!" she squealed, her usual cool composure completely gone. "I got an invitation to the CEO's annual leadership dinner. It's for the top 50 executives and rising stars only. He's going to be there. James Peterson is going to be there." Mark, my son, was thrilled for her. He jumped up and hugged her. "Jess, that's incredible. I told you he'd notice your hard work." "This is it, Mark," she said, her eyes shining with a feverish ambition. "This is my chance. I have to be perfect. The right dress, the right conversation. Everything has to be perfect." "Everything has to be perfect." She then looked at me, and her triumphant expression faltered slightly, replaced by a look of weary, dutiful obligation. It was a look I knew all too well. Mark, bless his kind, oblivious heart, jumped in. "Oh, that's great. We can all go. Mom would love it, wouldn't you, Mom? A fancy night out." Jessica's smile tightened at the edges. I could practically hear the gears turning in her head. Taking her quaint retired mother-in-law to the most important networking event of her career was not part of her perfect plan. It would require management. "Of course," she said, her voice a little too bright. "Eleanor, we would be thrilled to have you." I knew I should have said no. I knew I would be nothing more than a social accessory she felt obligated to carry, a prop in the grand theater of her ambition. But I looked at my son's happy, proud face. He wanted me there. He wanted his family to be united in this moment of his wife's success. And for him, I was willing to endure 1,000 of Jessica's condescending smiles. "That sounds lovely, dear," I said, my own smile genuine. I would be delighted to attend. In the days leading up to the dinner, my presence became one of Jessica's many projects to be managed. She called me 3 times to discuss my wardrobe. "Now, Eleanor," she'd said, her voice laced with a patronizing concern, "this is a very high-powered, very modern event. That little floral dress you wore to the charity luncheon last year, it's sweet, but it won't do. You need something chic." Understated. "Let's stick to a solid dark color. Navy blue, perhaps. And for heaven's sake, no shawls." I assured her I had a perfectly appropriate navy blue blazer. Then came the conversation about the conversation. "When we're at the table," she instructed, "it's probably best to let me guide the conversation. The people there, they'll be talking about market trends, leveraged buyouts, things that would probably just bore you. You just relax and look lovely." I assured her I was an excellent listener. The night of the dinner, I arrived at their house, dressed in my simple but elegant navy blue blazer and a classic pearl necklace. I felt comfortable. I felt like myself. Jessica looked me over, her eyes doing a swift, critical scan. She let out a small, resigned sigh. "That will have to do, I suppose," she said, more to herself than to me. As we drove to the exclusive downtown hotel where the dinner was being held, I sat in the back of the car, a quiet, smiling observer. Jessica was a nervous wreck, rehearsing her talking points, reapplying her lipstick. She was a soldier preparing for battle. I, on the other hand, was simply looking forward to a nice meal and a chance to see my son. I had absolutely no idea that I was about to walk, completely unarmed, into the crossfire of my daughter-in-law's ambition. And I had no idea that a ghost from my past was about to come back and single-handedly win the war for me. The ballroom of the St. Regis Hotel was a breathtaking sea of black ties, designer gowns, and the low, confident hum of power. Crystal chandeliers, each the size of a small car, cast a glittering golden light over the assembly. This was Jessica's natural habitat, the world she desperately wanted to conquer. For me, it was just a room, a beautifully decorated room, but a room nonetheless. I had been in 100 just like it over the years. The faces changed, the dresses changed, but the scent of ambition and expensive perfume was always the same. Jessica was in her element, but she was also a nervous wreck. She clutched a champagne flute like a weapon, her eyes darting around the room, identifying the key players, the corporate power brokers, the people who mattered. Mark, my son, stood beside her, looking slightly overwhelmed but deeply proud. He was her handsome, silent accessory, and I was his. For the first hour, I was largely invisible, and I was perfectly content with that. I was introduced to a few of Jessica's colleagues, a series of bright, sharp, young men and women with impressive titles and anxious eyes. To them, I was a non-entity, a +1, my son's quaint, elderly mother. They would shake my hand, their grips firm and their smiles fleeting, before their eyes would immediately dart over my shoulder, searching for someone more important to talk to. "This is my mother-in-law, Eleanor," Jessica would say, a note of polite but unmistakable apology in her voice. She would then immediately pivot the conversation to a topic she deemed more relevant. "So, Bill, what are your thoughts on the Q4 projections for the Asian market?" I was a social hurdle to be quickly and efficiently cleared. I just smiled, a quiet, amused observer. I was watching my daughter-in-law perform a frantic, high-stakes dance, and I found the entire spectacle fascinating in a detached, anthropological sort of way. Dinner was served at large, round tables. I was seated between Mark and a senior vice president of finance, a man with a perpetually worried expression who spent the entire meal staring at the stock market ticker on his phone. The conversation was a dizzying flurry of corporate jargon, synergy, disruption, scalability. I had sat at tables like this my entire life, but tonight I was content to play the part Jessica had assigned me, the silent, smiling, and completely irrelevant old woman. The main event, I knew, was the arrival of the CEO. James Peterson was making his rounds, moving from table to table, a king visiting the various fiefdoms of his kingdom. As his approach to our table became imminent, I could feel the tension radiating off Jessica in palpable waves. She subtly straightened her dress. She checked her lipstick in the reflection of a spoon. This was her moment. Finally, he arrived. James Peterson was as impressive as his reputation suggested. He was in his late 40s, tall and charismatic, with a sharp, intelligent face and an easy, confident smile that made everyone at the table lean in slightly. Jessica stood up, her own smile a perfect, polished creation. "Mr. Peterson," she said, her voice smooth as silk. "What an honor. I'm Jessica Hayes, from the brand development team. This is my husband, Mark." James shook their hands warmly. "Jessica, a pleasure. I've been hearing good things about your work on the new campaign." Jessica glowed. It was the highest praise she could have imagined. "Thank you, sir. That means the world to me." His eyes then moved to me, still seated, the quiet, smiling woman in the navy blue blazer. His smile was polite, expectant. It was my daughter-in-law's moment to complete the introductions, to present her quaint, harmless mother-in-law, and then move on. And it was here that she made the single, fatal, and most catastrophic miscalculation of her entire, carefully planned life. Perhaps she thought it would make her seem more impressive by comparison. Perhaps she thought a little self-deprecating humor at my expense would be charming. Or perhaps, in her desperate, clawing ambition, the ugly, dismissive thoughts she had always harbored about me finally slipped their leash. She let out a small, tinkling laugh, a sound of pure, condescending artifice. She gestured towards me with a dismissive wave of her hand. "And this," she said, her voice dripping with a kind of playful, patronizing pity, "is my poor, useless mother-in-law, Eleanor." The words dropped onto the table with the force of a physical blow. Poor, useless. She continued, still laughing, digging the hole even deeper. "She doesn't get out much, so all of this is a bit overwhelming for her. We're just happy she could join us." The entire table froze. Mark's face went white. The financial VP finally looked up from his phone, his eyes wide with shock. This wasn't just a breach of etiquette. It was an act of breathtaking public cruelty. I did not react. The initial, searing shock of the insult was immediately replaced by a profound, almost cosmic sense of amusement. The sheer, blind, idiotic arrogance of it all was a thing of terrible beauty. I did not get angry. I did not feel humiliated. I felt like a chess master who had just watched her opponent, in a fit of supreme confidence, move her own king directly into checkmate. I simply held my serene, knowing smile. But the reaction I was waiting for came from the man standing beside her, James Peterson. His warm, charismatic CEO smile did not just fade. It vanished. It was as if a mask had been ripped from his face, revealing the stone-cold features beneath. The color drained from his face, leaving him pale with a look of utter, profound disbelief. His eyes, which had been polite and friendly just a second before, were now locked on me, wide with a dawning, electrifying recognition. He completely ignored Jessica. He didn't even seem to see her anymore. He took a slow, deliberate step away from her, as if she were suddenly contaminated. And then, in the dead, stunned silence of the table, he slowly stood up to his full, impressive height. His eyes never left my face. And I knew. The ghost from my past had just arrived, and the party was about to get very, very interesting. The silence at our table was a living, breathing entity. It was a thick, suffocating thing, made heavier by the cheerful, oblivious chatter from the rest of the ballroom. It felt like our table had been encased in a soundproof bubble of pure, unadulterated horror. Jessica's condescending laugh had died in her throat. She was still smiling, but the smile was a frozen, grotesque rictus, a mask of terror that she hadn't yet realized she was wearing. She had no idea what she had done, but she knew, from the sudden, glacial shift in the atmosphere, that it was something terribly, irrevocably wrong. Mark looked like he wanted the floor to open up and swallow him whole. He was staring at his wife with a look of dawning, horrified comprehension, as if seeing her, truly seeing her, for the very first time. But my attention was on James Peterson. He stood there, towering over the table, his eyes locked on me. The powerful, charismatic CEO was gone. The man who stood there now was someone else entirely. He looked younger, more vulnerable. I saw in his eyes a flicker of the young, brilliant and terrified intern he had been 25 years ago, the boy I used to call Jamie. He took a slow, hesitant step around the table, his movements almost reverent, as if he were approaching a long-lost monument. The other executives at the table just stared, their forks frozen halfway to their mouths, their minds frantically trying to process the scene unfolding before them. This was not in the corporate playbook. Jessica, finally sensing that the source of the disaster was the very woman she had just dismissed, tried to recover. She let out another brittle, nervous laugh. "James," she said, her voice a little too high, a little too shaky. I was just joking, of course. My mother-in-law, she has a very dry sense of humor." James Peterson did not even seem to hear her. He had reached my side of the table now. He stopped in front of me, his expression a maelstrom of emotions, disbelief, awe, and a profound, almost overwhelming sense of respect. "Eleanor?" he whispered, his voice so quiet I could barely hear it. "Eleanor Hayes? Is that really you?" I finally allowed my own small, knowing smile to widen. I gave him a slow, deliberate nod. "Hello, Jamie," I said softly. "You've done very well for yourself. I always knew you would." The name, Jamie, spoken with such familiar affection, was the final confirmation. A wave of pure, unadulterated joy washed over his face, erasing the last traces of the stern CEO. He let out a laugh, a real, booming, genuine laugh of pure delight. And then, in an act that shattered every rule of corporate etiquette and sent a shockwave through the entire room, he leaned down, extended his hands, and pulled me up from my chair, and he hugged me. A warm, strong, and deeply affectionate embrace, right there in the middle of his own leadership dinner. "I can't believe it," he said, his voice thick with an emotion I couldn't quite place, as he pulled back but still held my arms. "I have been looking for you for years. After you retired, you just vanished. No one knew where you'd gone. I thought you'd moved to Florida or something." "I prefer the quiet life now," I said simply. It was only then that he seemed to remember where he was. He seemed to remember the woman who had set this entire, surreal scene in motion. He slowly turned his head, and his gaze, which had been so full of warmth for me, fell upon my daughter-in-law. The warmth vanished. His eyes became two chips of ice. The powerful, formidable, and now deeply, profoundly, royally pissed-off CEO was back. He looked at Jessica, who was standing there, her face a pale, frozen mask of utter, cataclysmic horror. She finally understood. She had not just insulted her mother-in-law. She had insulted the goddess of her new god. James Peterson looked from Jessica's terrified face to my calm one. He looked at the simple, elegant navy blue blazer I was wearing. And then he looked back at Jessica, and he spoke, his voice no longer a whisper, but a cold, clear, and ringing pronouncement meant for the entire table, and perhaps the entire room, to hear. "Jessica," he said, his voice dangerously quiet, "I think there has been a misunderstanding, so let me be perfectly clear." He turned his full attention to the table of stunned executives. "For those of you at this table who are too young to know," he began, his voice now booming with a new, educational authority, "the woman standing beside me is Eleanor Hayes. And 25 years ago, Eleanor Hayes was the single most brilliant and feared marketing executive in this entire industry. She was not a player in the game, she was the game." He looked back at me, a real, warm smile returning to his face. She was the one who gave a nervous, broke, and frankly terrified intern from a no-name state school his first shot. She was the one who taught him how to think, how to fight, how to build a brand out of nothing but an idea and sheer force of will. He then turned back to the table, his smile vanishing as he looked at Jessica. "The poor, useless woman you just mocked," he said, his voice dropping to a low, lethal growl, "is the reason I am standing here tonight as the CEO of this company. She is the reason you have a job at this company. She is not my employee's mother-in-law." He paused, letting the silence stretch for a final dramatic beat before delivering the final devastating blow. "She is my mentor." The word mentor hung in the air, electric and undeniable. It was a word so powerful, so completely at odds with the narrative Jessica had tried to create, that it seemed to suck all the oxygen out of the room. The executives at the table, who just moments ago had seen me as a quaint, irrelevant old woman, were now staring at me with a new, dawning expression of awe and profound respect. In the space of 30 seconds, I had been transformed from a social liability into a living legend. Jessica just stood there, swaying slightly, her face a ghastly shade of white. Her mouth opened and closed, but no sound came out. She looked at me, her eyes wide with a look of pure, unadulterated terror. She had not just made a social gaffe, she had committed career suicide in front of the most powerful people in her professional universe. My son, Mark, looked like he had been physically struck. He was staring at me as if he had never seen me before, and in a way, he hadn't. He had only ever seen Mom. He had never met Eleanor Hayes, the marketing titan, the mentor to a CEO, the woman he had allowed his wife to publicly humiliate. A deep, painful flush of shame crept up his neck. James Peterson was not finished. He was a man who believed in lessons, and he was about to conduct a masterclass. Still holding my arm in a gesture of protective reverence, he turned his ice-cold gaze back to my daughter-in-law. "You know, Jessica," he said, his voice a low, conversational, and utterly terrifying murmur, "I find myself in a difficult position. I have a core company policy. It's an unwritten rule, but it is the most important one we have. We do not tolerate disrespect. Not to our colleagues, not to our clients, and certainly not to the giants of this industry on whose shoulders we all stand." He looked around the table at his other executives, and they all nodded in solemn agreement. "And you," he continued, his focus narrowing back to Jessica, "have just demonstrated the most spectacular and breathtaking lack of respect I have ever witnessed in my entire professional career. You did it to your own family. Which leads me to a very simple conclusion." He paused, letting the silence hang heavy and cruel. "If you are capable of treating the woman who raised your husband with such casual public contempt, then you are a liability. You have no integrity. You have no character, and you have no place at my company." The words were a death sentence, delivered with the calm, quiet finality of a guillotine. Jessica finally found her voice. It was a desperate, pleading squeak. "Mr. Peterson, James, I didn't know. She never told us. I swear if I had known who she was." "That," James cut her off, his voice sharp as a razor, "is the entire point. It shouldn't matter who she island. You should have treated her with dignity simply because she is a human being. The fact that you only show respect to people you think can help your career, that doesn't make it better. It makes it infinitely worse." He then did something I will never forget. He looked past Jessica, directly at my son. "Mark," he said, and the disappointment in his voice was a palpable thing. "I have heard many stories about you over the years. Your mother was, and is, so incredibly proud of you. She spoke of your kindness, your good heart." He shook his head, a slow, sad gesture. A good heart does not sit silently while a loved one is being savaged. Loyalty, it seems, is a quality that was not passed down. That, for my son, was the moment the knife twisted. The shame on his face was so profound, so absolute, it was painful to watch. He had not just failed me. He had failed the memory of the woman his mentor, his boss, so clearly revered. He had failed himself. James Peterson then turned his back on them both, a gesture of final, absolute dismissal. He turned to me, and his warm, respectful smile returned. "Eleanor," he said, his voice booming for the whole room to hear, "there are some people at the head table I would be honored for you to meet, the board of directors. They have heard me tell stories about you for years. I think it's time they finally met the legend in person." He gently guided me away from the table, from the wreckage of my daughter-in-law's career and my son's self-respect. As we walked towards the head of the room, a strange thing happened. People began to stand up as we passed, first one table, then another. It was a spontaneous, rolling wave of respect. They were not standing for the CEO's guest. They were standing for me. I glanced back one last time. Jessica was still frozen in place, a statue of public humiliation. Mark had buried his face in his hands. Their perfect, ambitious evening had imploded. As James introduced me to his chairman, a man who shook my hand with genuine reverence, I felt a strange sense of detachment from the drama I had left behind. I had not sought this victory. I had not planned this revenge. I had simply shown up, been myself, and the universe in the form of a loyal, long-lost mentee had served justice on a silver platter. Later that evening, James walked me to my car. "I am so sorry, Eleanor," he said, his voice full of a genuine personal pain. "I am so sorry for what you had to endure at that table." "Don't be," I said, and I meant it. Sometimes the truth is a bitter medicine. It seems my family was long overdue for a dose. He smiled. "You haven't changed a bit," he said, "still the toughest woman I've ever met." He then grew serious. "And for what it's worth, the offer I made you 15 years ago to come and be a senior consultant on my executive team, that offer is still open, permanently." I looked at him, at the brilliant, powerful man he had become, and I felt a warmth I hadn't felt in a very long time. It was the warmth of being seen, of being valued, of being remembered. "I'll think about it, Jamie," I said, a real, genuine smile finally reaching my eyes. "I'll think about it." As I drove home through the glittering city lights, the quiet life I had so carefully built seemed to expand, new possibilities branching out like roads on a map. I had walked into that dinner as a quaint, retired mother-in-law. I was walking out as Eleanor Hayes again, and it felt, for the first time in a long time, like coming home. The drive home that night was a quiet, solitary journey through a city that suddenly seemed full of possibilities again. I did not feel triumphant. I did not feel a sense of vengeful satisfaction. I simply felt seen. For 5 years since my retirement, I had allowed myself to fade into the background, to become the gentle, supportive matriarch my family expected me to be. I had forgotten the woman I was. That night, Jessica and James, in their own very different ways, had forced me to remember. I did not sleep. I sat in my quiet living room, a cup of chamomile tea growing cold in my hands, and I thought about my son, Mark. I thought about the look of profound, soul-deep shame on his face. His crime was not one of malice, but of weakness. A weakness I, perhaps, had enabled with a lifetime of unconditional support and a refusal to see the boy he was instead of the man I wanted him to be. And I thought about Jessica. Her crime was simpler. It was a poverty of the soul, a desperate, grasping need to be seen as important, even if it meant extinguishing the light of others. The first call came at 7 o'clock in the morning. It was from a number I didn't recognize. I let it go to voicemail. A minute later, a text message appeared. "Mrs. Hayes, it's Bill Haverford from the Board of Directors. I just wanted to personally express my profound respect. It was an honor to finally meet you last night." Another text came, then another. They were from the other executives at the table, all expressing similar sentiments of admiration and apology. The story of what had happened, I realized, was already becoming a legend within the company. The story of the night. The CEO's mentor put his arrogant new hire in her place without saying a single word. The call I was waiting for came at 9 o'clock. It was Mark. His voice was a hoarse, broken thing. "Mom," he began, his voice thick with unshed tears. I am so sorry. I did not make it easy for him." "Sorry for what, specifically, Mark?" I asked, my voice calm and quiet. "Are you sorry for what Jessica said, or are you sorry that you sat there and let her say it?" There was a long, choked silence on the other end of the line. "For both," he finally whispered. "For everything. I have been a coward, and I have been a fool. There's no excuse." "No?" I said simply. "There isn't. Jessica, she's been fired, of course," he continued, his voice flat. "She got the official email an hour ago. She's not taking it well. She's blaming me. She's blaming you." "I'm sure she is," I said. "What she did, what she said about you. It was monstrous, Mom. I got so caught up in her world and trying to make her happy, I forgot what was important. I forgot who you are." I think, I said, my voice softening for the first time, that perhaps I had forgotten who I am too. I paused. I love you, Mark. You are my son, but love, without respect, is a house built on sand, and our house has just been washed away. It will need to be rebuilt, on a new foundation. I know, he said, his voice full of a genuine, painful remorse. I'll do whatever it takes. I promise. We ended the call. It was not a solution. It was not forgiveness, but it was a beginning. A small, new brick laid on the empty ground where our old relationship used to be. I sat there for another hour, just thinking. I thought about James Peterson's offer. To go back, to be a consultant, a senior advisor, to step back into the world of power and influence. A week ago, I would have laughed at the idea, but now it didn't seem so impossible. My phone rang again. This time it was a familiar number. It was James. Eleanor, he said, his voice warm and professional. I trust you slept well? Not a wink, I replied honestly, and I heard him chuckle. I have a feeling my daughter-in-law didn't either, he said. I could hear the smile in his voice. I am calling for 2 reasons. First, to formally apologize again for the scene last night. And second, to tell you that Jessica Hayes's letter of termination has been signed and sent. Her access to the building has been revoked. That was decisive, Jamie, I said. As you taught me, he replied, cut the cancer out before it can spread. Which brings me to my 3rd reason for calling, my offer from last night. It wasn't just the emotion of the moment talking, Eleanor. I was serious. I need you. This company needs your wisdom. I looked out my window at my beautiful, peaceful garden. I thought of the quiet life I had built. And then I thought of the thrilling, electric feeling of being back in the game, of my mind working, of being seen and respected for the lifetime of knowledge I possessed. Tell me more about the consulting position, Jamie, I said, a slow smile spreading across my face. I didn't know if I would take the job. I didn't know what the future held for my son and his now unemployed wife. But as I listened to the brilliant man I had once mentored lay out a vision for the future, a future he wanted me to be a part of, I knew one thing for certain: my retirement was officially over. Eleanor Hayes was back in the building, and it felt, for the first time in a long time, like coming home.